Hi, I'm John LeBlanc from Performance Designs. I've been fortunate to be involved in parachute design and development for nearly 30 years. And along the way, I've studied a lot about how parachutes deploy. And I'd like to share some of these ideas that I've picked up along the way with you. Well, there are a lot of things that go into making a parachute open the way it does. And a large number of those things are related to the design of the parachute, things that you chose when you decided to use that parachute. The line type, for example. Some line is fairly elastic, like Dacron line. It's commonly used on student canopies for that reason. It's just more forgiving of some of the things that can cause harder openings. It's a little bit elastic, so if there's a little spike in the load, it tends to be dissipated a little bit easier. But other lines in particular are very inelastic, and it transmits the loads through from the fast opening parachute to you a lot more abruptly, so you're more likely to feel it. So to get the best deployments, it's essential you control all the factors. And one of the factors is your airspeed at pull time. One of them is the packing, how well you pack. One of them is the line stows, making sure that they do their job properly. And the last thing is the pilot chute, size, condition, design. There are other things, but those are the major ones. Parachute's job is to slow you down, and the more that you do to slow your body down before you deploy your parachute, the better chances that the parachute's going to work as you intend. A lot of people have a fairly steep, fast track, perhaps maybe steeper than it should be, and they feel that if they go back into a hard arch position, that's slowing down. But it really isn't slowing down that much. In your initial first jump training, they may have taught you to do a very hard arch for stability reasons, to make sure you're not tumbling during deployment, which is, of course, pretty important. But once you are comfortable in free fall and comfortable that you're going to stay stable during your deployment, it's perfectly good. It's even advisable to flatten out your body a little bit to slow your descent rate. So slowing down is an important thing. Don't waste altitude if you have precious little. I mean, deploy at the right altitude, but slow down with enough time remaining before your pull time with a flatter body position. In order for the slider to do its job properly, it has to start in the right place. And the basics of that means that it has to be right up against the slider stops. And also, it's wise to quarter the slider so that as the four line groups start to separate from one another early on in the deployment of the canopy, that the slider's right there in the middle, ready to do its job. The relative wind will hit that. And so you kind of cloverleaf or quarter the slider. It's also important that the fabric of the slider be pushed down inside the parachute. That way, it helps to keep the slider up against the bottom of the canopy during the entire packing process. Sometimes people pull the slider front to back and side to side so much that the fabric in the middle kind of comes up closer to the grommets, and there's really not much that's holding the slider down against the stops if the fabric is just all over the place. So you need to put the slider in the right place and quarter it and make sure it stays there throughout the entire pack job. When you bag the canopy, the most important thing is to make sure that the parachute is organized properly and that there's even tension right through from the risers all the way up through the top of the canopy, so that when you fold it up, everything is nice and tight and organized. The parachute will never come out of the bag any more organized than it was when it went into the bag. And in general, a more organized parachute tends to deploy properly. That's what pro packing is supposed to refer to, proper ram air organization. And that makes a big difference. The bag should be sized properly for the parachute and also sized properly for the rig. If the parachute is a loose, sloppy fit in the bag, the parachute kind of flops out of the bag in a big wad, and it's kind of a little chaotic, and it can lead to poor deployments. It should actually be in the deployment bag, where the mouth of the bag closes the bag, and the rubber bands go through the grommets, with the grommet being placed right over where the knot is that holds the rubber band to the bag. Stretching a rubber band across a big pile of nylon isn't really closing the bag, and all that nylon hanging out on the sides can reduce the reliability of the deployment and can lead to hard openings. The line stow thing is something that there's so many different line types, so many different line stow methods, rubber bands and tube stows and all these things. There are many different combinations that you could play with. What's important is that regardless of what kind of line you're using, whether it's the biggest, heaviest Dacron or the very lightest competition, 300-pound line, whatever you're stowing the lines with, it has to hold each and every stow with adequate tension. And you can actually measure that with a spring scale. Just hook it onto the pilot chute and then slowly pull on the pilot chute with a spring scale with the bag on a smooth surface, and just slowly increase the tension until the lines come off out of the rubber band. And it should be 8 to 12 pounds for each and every line stow. If you're using small rubber bands and it provides that, then great. If you use the small rubber bands and for whatever reason it's not 8 to 12 pounds, then try something else. The larger rubber bands, double stowed, are very popular for a lot of the low drag lines, Microline, Vectran, those sorts of lines. May not be necessary on the Dacron line. The best way to really determine that is to actually measure the stow force in the way that I mentioned. And when you measure it, you pull slowly. You steadily build up the pressure until the line stow comes off. You don't just yank on it, because the loads go up really high and you'll get a false reading. The length of your line stow has a lot to do with how much retention you get from your stow band. If you're single stowing, it's important that they're not too short. 2.5 inches approximately is a good length. Of course, if you're packing a tandem canopy, where the line bulk on a Dacron canopy, the line bulk can be so large that 2.5 inches on the whole length is not very much on the inside line. So maybe you might want to go a little longer. When you double stow a line, though, the rubber band wraps all the way around the lines once, and then it goes to the attachment point on the bag, and that tends to retain the lines quite a bit better. So it's not necessary to go quite as long, and some people believe that it can cause erratic openings if you get crazy long with double stowing. So 1.5 inches, 2 inches is probably fine with double stows. If they're too short, they simply slip out too quickly, which can lead to problems. The first locking stows, they should be tight enough to keep it closed until they're the last stows left to release. So what we commonly do is we use large rubber bands and double stow the rubber band. Some people feel that maybe that's not smart, because they believe it can lead to a bag lock. And a bag lock is a malfunction that you can have, and there are a variety of causes of bag locks. Most of them are pilot chute problems, not necessarily a line stow that was too tight. If, let's say you do have a line stow that for some reason you wrapped the rubber band 10 times or something silly and it was too tight, the resulting malfunction, bag lock, is really high speed. You've got to pay attention. You've got to respond immediately to it. But it's not a hard opening. It doesn't incapacitate you. You can just react to it. I like to say nobody ever died from a bag lock unless they tried to land it. But on the other hand, fear of a bag lock leading to loose line stows, loose locking stows, can lead to an out of sequence opening, which can be brutally hard. It can actually damage your equipment. It can incapacitate you, can knock you out. So you can have a malfunction and not even know because you're knocked out. So you've got two evils there. A hard opening that can create bodily damage, even kill you on one side, and a bag lock which requires prompt action and not much else on the other. So I'm not afraid of a line stow that's too tight. The important thing to remember about pilot chutes is to remember it's a parachute. It's an important one. It has a design. It can be used and abused. Mesh can get torn up and stretched out of shape. The fabric can increase in permeability. The center line of the pilot chute is a critical part of the design, and with a kill line type pilot chute, depending on the type of kill line, it might be shrinking up, which can cause deployment problems for the pilot chute. In other words, it may not inflate correctly or stay inflated during the deployment. So it's important to make sure that you have that inspected, that you take care of it, and that you replace it when it's old. One common error is in pilot chute size. You have to have a pilot chute that is of sufficient size to deploy the parachute, but not so large that it generates too much force. And usually in the 27 to 30-inch range is good for most parachutes. We like F-111 pilot chutes because they seem to be more forgiving of the specific design of the pilot chute. It's not something that all pilot chutes of one size perform the same, because there are subtle variations in design and in the age and condition of the pilot chute. But if the pilot chute has too much force, it can completely take your whole deployment sequence and disrupt it, make it go completely out of sequence and lead to a hard opening. If it's too large, obviously it can create a hard opening because it can actually rip the bag off the parachute prematurely. If it's too small, it can disrupt your deployment sequence because it doesn't pull the parachute out of the container. So there's a just right mode in there. A riser cover that does not release properly can actually lead to hard openings. If by chance your riser covers stay shut until the parachute comes out of the bag, then what happens is when the parachute starts to expand to slider size, it can snap those riser covers off at that point, and that puts like a little bit of a slack into the system just for a split second, and it can cause a hard opening. It can cause a hard opening if one releases and not the other, or it can cause a problem if both of them release at the wrong time. The other thing that people are taught to do, which is advisable when you begin, is to look at your parachute when you deploy it. I believe that the reason we teach students to look up at the parachute is because you want them to eventually look up and see if it's there. I hate to think of what would happen if I had my first malfunction on my first jump, but I'm sure that my instructor telling me, look at it, check it, is pretty important. As time goes on, you make more jumps, you learn to feel what the parachute feels like on a deployment, and it's not necessary to look at it while it's deploying. It can lead to a bad body position, maybe crane your neck in a weird way. It can also lead to strange body positions that don't help your openings. Some people look kind of that way or something, and this is not the type of body position you want to have when you accept the parachute getting to the end of the lines. You want to be square and straight. Looking at it isn't going to help. If it's doing something weird, you'll know about it soon enough. But if you do have a hard opening, being square in the harness, eyes on the horizon will be much, much better for you. The bottom line on getting good deployments, avoiding hard openings, is that there are many interrelated factors involved. And sometimes people are willing to be kind of lax about it, lazy about it. But the fact is that even when everything's designed right and you seem to have packed everything right, you deploy it right, you can still get a hard opening. So it makes a lot of sense to me to do everything you can to control every one of those factors so that you have your best chance of getting a good deployment, nice soft opening the way you want.